Health inspectors of Reddit. What's the worst violation you've ever seen? My stepdad used to be a baker in an authentic recreation of an 18th century New French fortress. Because they sell bread to the public, the health inspector came by, and she was ripping into my stepdad for violations like the stonework walls, the doorless entranceways, or the lack of a mosquito zapper. He pointed out that they were following the highest standards except for things that would destroy the authenticity of this 18th century bakery. The health inspector relented and agreed to give him a pass after verifying the food storage area was secure. They went to the shed, which was a doorless building attached to the bakery. As the health inspector went in, there happened to be an escaped cow licking all of the loaves. My stepdad could only say, "Honestly, this never happens." They passed the health inspection. Story 2. My favorite Chinese restaurant got shut down. My ex-wife worked for the city, and I asked her what was the deal. She said the health inspectors found something leaking from the ceiling. They lifted the ceiling tile and shined a flashlight and saw multiple eyes staring back at them. It was chickens. They were raising chickens in the ceiling, and chicken crap was dripping in the food that I'd been eating at least once a week. Story 3. My friend was inspecting a restaurant, walked out the back to find a man stirring a huge pot of curry with his arm. No spoon or anything, just up to his hairy elbows in curry. Story 4. My stepmother is the lead health inspector for a decent-sized suburban town. While I have never asked what the worst thing she has witnessed as part of her job was, I do know of one instance that was pretty gross. A truck full of lobsters was traveling down the highway and crashed. The police came, and eventually, they towed the truck. As a Board of Health inspector, my stepmother was consulted to see if any of the lobsters were viable, and she told them no. The load is a total loss, since there were literally lobsters scattered across the highway, covered in dirt, sand, etc. Fast forward 24 hours, and one of the restaurants in town ran a special. Twin lobsters for $20. Apparently, the owner of the trucking towing company knew the restaurant owner pretty well, so they made a deal whereby the restaurant would pay a very discounted price for the road lobsters. The restaurant would turn around and illegally serve the lobsters to unsuspecting customers or sell them out of a truck behind the restaurant. I'm not sure what the repercussions were, but I think they were shut down for like a week. They closed shortly thereafter, and now there's a new restaurant there. The towing company lost their contract to tow vehicles, semi-trucks, with the town and state. Story 5. Not a health inspector, but worked in a restaurant where the managers were good friends with one. The coffee, ice cream shop next door was shut down out of nowhere, and we were all shocked because they were pretty busy. Health inspector came in one day, and manager asked why it was shut down. Health inspector proceeded to tell my manager that he walked in unannounced early one morning before the shop opened, only to find the owner getting off behind the counter by the ice cream. Story 6. When I went to culinary school, one of professors made the statement, "If you want to know how clean a restaurant's kitchen is, go to bathroom first before you are seated. If the bathroom is dirty, there is a good chance the kitchen is in the same condition." Story 7. Not a health inspector, but someone in my city repainted their floor with non-slip paint and literally painted over a dead rat, sealing it in there. And to top it off, it was in the middle of the kitchen, not under a bench or anything similar. Story 8. Did food safety inspection at a large slaughterhouse for a while. We did our own inspections each shift, and the government inspector stopped by once a day too. One day, I came round a corner, and one of the workers who was running service for the butchers had dropped a ham on the floor. So, the proper way to handle this for him was to leave it there and call for a re-inspector to come pick it up. Take it out to carve off any contaminated bits and rinse it in boiling water. Now it relatively often happened meat was dropped on the floor. It's just very hard to avoid it when running in a factory setting with human labor. So this was common. What was uncommon was what the guy did. First he tried catching it as it fell, which would have been fine. No contact with any surface, and he could have just thrown it back into the tub it had fallen out of. He didn't catch it though, and it landed on the floor. Thinking that no one was watching, he tried picking it up and dropped it again. He did this 3 times. So first and foremost, he's not supposed to be touching anything that's been on the floor. It cross-contaminates his hands, and he has nowhere to put the contaminated product anyway. But he did this 3 times and dropped it 3 times. Freshly carved hams can be slippery when wearing vinyl gloves. He then, out of pure frustration, annoyance at the unwieldy ham, dropped down on all fours and proceeded to pick up the raw, freshly cut 6-kilo ham by his teeth, stood up, ham dangling from his champers, and dropped it into the tub with around 600 kilo of product and drove off with the tub for processing. He was fired a few minutes after that, and the entire tub of product discarded. Story 9. The dumpster needed to be moved 6 inches from the back exit of the bar. Otherwise, everything I inspected was up to standard. Bartenders seemed sweaty all the time. Bathroom stalls could have used a little touch-up, didn't get to spend much time in the basement. I became quite dizzy for some reason. They were given a passing grade. Story 10. Health inspector here. I worked on the private side auditing 29 different chains in the USA. I did a couple inspections a day for a little under 3 years. I have hundreds of stories. One, I can smell roaches the second I walk into a building, if they're present. They have a nutty, oily smell that is very distinctive if you're around them often enough. That's a smell you never forget. Relevant story. I was in a popular buffet chain and couldn't find the roaches I smelled. I looked everywhere. I called my buddy who was a pest control officer. He came in, grabbed a large shop vac and said, "Move fast." He lifted off the back of the soft serve ice cream machine and they poured out like a waterfall all over the floor. We got them all cleaned up. Soft serve ice cream machines all leak, and typically they're not cleaned well. Hot, wet, and dark is the perfect place for an infestation. 2. People don't know how to wash and glove their hands. Relevant story. I can't tell you how many times I've seen cooks walk out of the bathroom with their gloves and aprons still on. That makes my blood boil. 3. People don't know how to properly cool a cooked product. Relevant story. I saw a 5-gallon Cambro of rice in a walk-in with no date. I asked how long it had been cooling, and they explained for several days. Knowing that rice is incredibly difficult to cool, I asked them to dump it out onto a clean table. The smell of death, Clostridium, filled the air. That rice would have probably killed someone. 4 ice machines are never clean. Relevant story. 9 times out of 10, an ice machine has an active and pretty impressive slime mold in it. Just stick your head in and look up. 5 soda guns are typically not clean. Relevant story. I can't tell you how many times I've pulled the cap off the soda gun to see maggots crawling around in the buildup. Think about that next time you order a Coke at your favorite Mexican restaurant. 6. If you see a fruit fly in a restaurant, it's not because it's summer and everyone has them now. It's because the drains in the kitchen are not clean and the flies are breeding in the scum impacted any drain. Bonus story. I was in a BBQ joint inside a casino. They told me that the place was an issue, and they had washed their hands of the problems hoping they would just close shop. Needless to say, the flies were a problem. But the biggest concern was the prop table in the kitchen that had never been cleaned. It was a very large and stainless steel table. The bottom of the tabletop was dripping with grease and fat from the BBQ. No clue how it got there. Maggots were crawling all over the underside of the table. The smell was nothing I will ever forget. This place served hundreds of people a day under gross incompetence. Story 11. Used to have a job working as an inspector for storage tanks at places like dairies and factories. Went to a cheesecake factory once to test a milk storage tank. It had just been cleaned and was being prepped to be filled with a tanker full of milk. I noticed the floor of the tank was covered in bleach. It turned out the floor manager couldn't be arced to spend the time sucking out the rest of the cleaning fluid used in the cleaning process and, as standard, just filled the tank with milk on top of a dozen gallons of bleach. His theory was that there was enough milk to dilute the bleach to acceptable consumption levels. I wrote a report, and he was promptly fired. My 12-gallon estimate is just that, an estimate. It was a huge milk storage silo, 40,000 L-IRC, and roughly half an inch of the floor of the tank was covered in cleaning fluid. The dilutions we're talking about probably wouldn't have been harmful or even tasteable after being pasteurized and mixed with cheesecake ingredients. But that's also a guess. And it's also not the point. Story 12, not a health inspector. But a Chinese buffet near me was closed down because it got a 0 in its inspection. I got food poisoning from there once. The staff just got up and left, locked the door, never went back. All the food was still out, and everything. A week later, a man was walking his dog past, said Chinese buffet, and heard a loud buzzing noise. Looked through the window to see hundreds of thousands of flies that had taken over the building as their new home. It was so bad that Pizza Hut next door had to close too. Story 13. Not a health inspector, but my mom used to work at this restaurant, where the owner just did not give a crap. It was a Mexican restaurant, and my mom told me that once a lady came in asking for beef soup, but they didn't have any more meat, at least not the one used for that dish. They were about to let the lady know, when the owner stepped up and told the lady that her food would be right out. The server and my mom were both confused as to what she was going to do. Well, this lady goes and literally digs through the damn trash and pulls out some beef, some still with bone. She then ran it through water, cooked it, and served it to that poor lady. My mom says the lady was even sucking the bone, and she almost felt sick watching. My mom quit that job soon after. Asked my mom again about it, and here is what she said. The bone, meat was not raw. It was leftover from people who had ordered the same thing. They had almost ran out of that soup. All the meat was gone, so they thought they would not serve anymore. The owner grabbed the bone, meat, from the trash, rinsed it, and threw it back in what was left of the soup, heated up for a bit, and served it. Just thought I needed to clarify this. Story 14. I wish my wife was a Redditor. She would own this thread. Here are a couple I remember from her days as a restaurant inspector for the state health department. 1. A complaint from a grocery store that the Chinese restaurant next door was raiding their dumpster each night and taking all the produce they could find. 2. Walking into another Chinese restaurant and seeing pigeons in a cage in the back room. Just regular city pigeons. Asking, "You're not serving these to the customers, are you?" And being told, No, those are just for us." I don't mean to disparage Chinese people by citing two incidents about Chinese restaurants, but the truth is that many Chinese people come to the USA on a shoestring budget and cut corners as much as they can. Plus, the standards of healthy food service are often very strange to them. Telling someone that they can't cut the lettuce for the salad bar with the same knife they just used to cut a raw chicken is like telling them they have to stand on their head before cooking something. They just don't get it. They always did it this way at home. Your body gets used to fighting off the bacteria you grow up with. People from the other side of the planet have bodies that can handle bacteria we aren't used to in the Midwest part of the USA. But that's a very hard point to get across. Here's one more from another side of the economic spectrum. I have a friend who plays in a band which has some national recognition. I won't say any more, but they've had a few top 10 hits. He told me once that his band was booked to play a very expensive corporate New Year's party for a very rich corporation. The party took place at a very swanky hotel in a big city. He and the band had to load in through the hotel restaurant kitchen. Unfortunately, the sewers had backed up and the entire kitchen of this swanky hotel restaurant was ankle deep in raw sewage. But there was no way the hotel manager was going to go out into the party room and explain to a host of $1,000 a plate diners that the kitchen was closed on New Year's Eve. So the kitchen staff kept cooking and the waiters kept serving. They put on rubber boots before entering the sewer kitchen to grab the next plate. The moral of the story is that food service is all about the money first. Understandable, because if there's no money, there's no food service. But you are just as likely to get food poisoning at the most expensive restaurant in town as you are at some local hole in the wall. Sometimes more so because there's more money at stake. Story 15. Not a health inspector, but my mom told me this story some time ago. When she was in her early 20s, she had started working as a waitress for the restaurant in this big fancy hotel. Just a few days after she started working there, the hotel was hosting some big event. So there were a ton of super rich people staying there, and thus the restaurant was super busy. So my mom goes into the kitchen at one point and sees that one of the chefs is clearly sick. He's coughing and hacking, and continually wiping his runny nose on a handkerchief, right as he's making food. So my mom goes to her boss and is like, "Hey, this chef is sick. He can't be working right now. He's going to make everyone sick." Her boss tells her that the guy said he was fine and to not worry about it. So my mom goes to the sick guy and tells him that he has to leave to prevent the food from being contaminated. He tells her that he tried to call in sick, but the boss told him that they were going to be too busy and they needed him, and if he didn't show up for work, he'd be fired. So my mom goes back to the boss and he admits that, yeah, he knew the guy was really sick, but he didn't care if everyone else got sick as long as they got through the event. My mom tells her boss that this is wrong and that he needs to send the guy home, take back everyone's food, refund their money, throw out all the food that may have been contaminated, close the place down and clean it up. He simply laughs at her and tells her she's fired. So she went and did the logical thing. She walked out into the dining room, stood on top of a table and shouted to everyone at the event that the boss forced a sick man to work today, and all of their food was probably contaminated. There was practically a riot. Everyone crowded around and screamed at the boss, demanding their money back. In the end, the restaurant was temporarily closed. Everyone got their money back. The boss of the restaurant was fired by the owner of the hotel, and Mom got to keep her job. Story 16. A local restaurant got shut down for a 4-precinct rating. A fast food eatery in central Bakersfield has been shut down after being found with several violations and getting a 4-precinct inspection review. It's the lowest score we have ever issued in Kern County, said Department of Public Health spokesperson Michelle Corson. A fast food eatery in central Bakersfield has been shut down after being found with several violations and getting a 4-precinct inspection review. It's the lowest score we have ever issued in Kern County, said Department of Public Health spokesperson Michelle Corson. According to the Kern County Health Department, Johnny's Burgers, located on Oak Street near California Avenue, found mold growing on cooked rice stored inside walk-in cooler. They also found rodent droppings on the floor of food preparation area, on shelving units, and near an unused fryer. Rodent traps were found in walk-in freezer, back storage, and by a 3-compartment sink. The operator voluntarily condemned boxes of bacon, 9 boxes of hamburger patties, 25 pounds of raw pastrami, and several other foods. Story 17. Worked in a restaurant. Sitting in the office one day, I hear an awful squeaking, shrieking noise. Took me a little while to find the source. Source turned out to be a mouse, stuck in some old spilled pancake syrup under a storage shelf, being eaten by the mouse stuck next to it. Story 18. When my son was 5 or so, we had a nanny who used to look after him, and she used to take him to a local pub where one of her friends worked. He got used to sitting at the bar, eating a packet of crisps, chips, and drinking a soda. I'm starting to realize, as I recount this, as it doesn't reflect too well on my parenting skills. Oh well, he's 17 years old now, so I guess it's too late for social services to come and take him away. Anyway, the nanny was great, no matter what you might say. The nanny and her friend were round the corner in the other bar chatting away, when a couple of besuited gentlemen wandered into the bar. My son was laying a line of crisps along the bar, and one of the gents started talking to him. It's worth noting that the regulars in the bar were used to him being there and often referred to him as the boss. They let him pour them drinks and so on, ostensibly under the supervision of the bar staff. Needless to say, it's illegal for 5-year-olds to be employed as bar staff, even in the UK. "I'm in charge here. Would you like a drink?" offered my son, scooting round the back of the bar. "No, it's okay, thanks. What are the crisps for?" "Oh, I'm feeding my friend," my son replied. "Really, where's your friend?" "He lives in that little hole." My son pointed to a hole in the wall towards the end of the bar. "And sometimes he comes out and I feed him." On cue, a small mouse appeared out of the hole, ran along the bar, and started eating the crisps. The men were environmental health officers. The pub was shut down that week and never reopened. Luckily, they weren't police. Otherwise, the nanny's friend would have been in serious trouble. This story was pieced together from the report of the nanny, and also my son, who thought the whole thing was hilarious. The nanny's friend was quite relieved, as she hated the job anyway. Story 19, not health inspector, but I worked as an assistant cook in a restaurant. 2 weeks into the job, I opened a cupboard to get a can of tomato sauce, and I see a huge-ass tarantula scuttling away behind the cans. I told the boss what I had seen, so that maybe we should get someone to deal with the huge-ass spider living in the kitchen. Boss turns to me and say, "I see you've met Eduardo. Just don't put your hand too close to him and you'll be good." Later, another cook proceeded to explain to me the spider been living there for 2 years, and they allowed it because he kept rodents and roaches away. This is a true story. So know this, Reddit. Every time that you think about swatting a spider, remember that there is a possibility that a friendly spider is guarding your favorite restaurant's food against nasty critters. Story 20. Not me, my cousin. She was a health inspector for the city of Melbourne, Australia many years ago. Her advice? Never eat at Chinatown. Dead fish floating in the tanks of seafood restaurants, with barely alive fish in the same tanks, slime and mold in said tanks, rusty surfaces used as chopping boards and mold-covered wooden chopping boards, raw meats prepared together with raw vegetables. The lady washing the dishes at the cash register was the same lady that cleaned the toilets and made the dumplings. She never washed her hands. It doesn't matter how much you pay, whether you spent $200 on your meal or $20. They are all as filthy as each other. The most expensive and well-known were actually the worst offenders' cockroaches. Cockroaches everywhere. There's no such thing as an expiry date. Sauces mask everything. There is a saying here, though, that many people are aware of. The nastier the place, the better the dumplings taste. Story 21, former inspector here. I once discovered a rat infestation in the kitchen of a hospital. They asked me if I could prove my suspicions. I pointed out the numerous foodstuffs with 2 inches circular holes chewed in them, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the trail of droppings and footprints coming and going from a hole in the floor drain, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the 3 dead rats I had discovered under and around equipment. I think they began to believe me at that point. Citations included rat infestation and absolutely deplorable cleaning practices. Story 22. I had to take a sanitation class for culinary school. One day, the health inspector came in and gave us a presentation. He looked up all the citations in town, and my personal favorite was improper use of a hand sink for the local club. Story 23. Not a health inspector, but assistant manager at a restaurant for a year between university. I once saw my sous chef flick a filet steak out of the pan, kick it back up with his foot, and land it back in the pan to continue cooking. He did this 4 times. I was watching on the CCTV, trying not to laugh every time he celebrated each catch. Story 24. Not a health inspector, but I used to manage a well-known sandwich shop. One day, I discovered a huge colony of black mold growing behind one of the walls. I mentioned it to my assistant manager, who told me that everyone knew it was there, and that the entire staff assumed that I also knew about it and was just keeping my mouth shut. I reported it to the district manager and the owner that day. They both told me that they knew for a fact that black mold was harmless, and that they weren't going to pay $3 grand to tear out the drywall and replace it. I was fired inside of a week. I reported them to the local health department, but by the time the health department got around to doing the inspection, they had already fixed the wall. Story 25. I work produce in a grocery store. My team never culls the bad apples and just likes to put the new ones on top of the old. Imagine grabbing an apple expecting normal apple and having your fingers sink into mold. Story 26. When my dad was a teenager, he would go to a beach half an hour away with his mates, and on the way home they would stop at a great pie place. It was well known, and Dad says they served the greatest pies ever. They got shut down after it got out. Their pies were full of tinned dog food. Story 27. Health inspectors. Do you ever fear being attacked by someone when you are writing up a bad report? Particularly a really bad one that would shut them down. You are essentially destroying their livelihood, and I am sure some would take it a little far. However, Yes, I worded it wrong. I'm well aware that the problems a restaurant has is the owner's fault, and it's not the big bad health inspector. I suppose I was trying to put myself in the owner's shoes. As an irrational owner, I'd likely see it as an attack on my livelihood. Story 28. On a plus note, I've been a chef for 17 years and haven't ever seen anything overly gross at a restaurant I've worked at. I've mostly done fine dining and high-end chains, though, although traveling to other countries is a different matter. You may resume eating. Story 29. I had a health inspector tell me this story. There was a family in which both the elderly mother and a handicapped sibling used wheelchairs. Another sibling lived in the house with them and did all the driving, etc. The health department got a phone call from the local wheelchair company. The brother stopped by and picked up a new, custom-built wheelchair for his sister and for his mother, and returned within about 30 minutes, saying that the sister's wheelchair hadn't been made to the right specifications. It was too small. After he left, the staff noticed several roaches on the chair, so the guy I met got a call. Apparently it was summer, Midwest, both hot and humid. And the house was all locked up with no open windows for ventilation, curtains drawn, etc. The inspector entered the house and he said it was so stifling hot that he started to get dizzy and, he thought, hallucinate. He said that there was a sound like leaves rustling in the fall and the walls and floors were kind of vibrating. He then realized it was because they were literally covered in roaches. He immediately evacuated the 3 people living there, and the next day, they tented and sprayed the house. He went in a Tyvek suit and knee-high rubber boots, and said that the dead roaches were about 2.5 feet deep in most parts of the house. Story 30. I used to work next to a Chinese place that tenderized 20-pound roasts by repeatedly slamming it on the floor. The pizzeria I was working at the time was so dirty, the wife changed the baby inside your pizza box. At another pizzeria I worked at, I was washing dishes, and the manager came to me with a block of Swiss cheese. It was covered in mold, and he wanted me to scrub it out of the holes. Story 31. Pools that have absolutely no chlorine. Pedicure tubs, filters that have never been changed. All of their disinfectants were expired. A restaurant that refused to clean up pest feces, refused to properly cool foods, and refused to properly reheat foods. The kitchen had exposed wood everywhere. Well, it would be exposed if there wasn't a thick layer of grease. And no sanitizer. Story 32. 2 years ago, a college in my department under food safety went to inspect a Chinese in a local town. Everything was going okay as food hygiene inspections go for a better-than-average Chinese, until she went to inspect the space upstairs above the kitchen. Our policy is that where employees stay, if it's in the same building, that is part of the premises. When she went up, she found a large number of illegal immigrants staying there. The police were alerted, and the Chinese was closed down before reopening under another name. I think registered under the owner's wife's name. Another quick new premises inspection followed, and it got a hygiene rating of 4 out of 5, which for the type of premises is about as good as you'd expect, and it was left alone for 2 years. Fast forward to last week, another college went to inspect the premises for their biannual routine inspection. You'll never guess what the police were called for again. Story 33. For as bad as some of these stories are, I hope people understand that people in restaurants do touch your food. There's nothing that you eat in a restaurant that hasn't been directly touched by somebody in the kitchen. Some of you may be thinking, well, why don't they all just wear latex gloves? Actually, there's a couple reasons. They break far too easily, among others, that make it impractical, but most importantly, if you only wear gloves, then whatever it is that you think is on their hands is now just on their latex gloves. Compulsive hand washing, hair nets, and keeping the place properly cleaned is as much as anybody can reasonably expect. Incidentally, Applebee's has to be the cleanest place I ever worked at. If you were standing around, they'd hand you a toothbrush and tell you scrub the grout between the tiles. Every day was a good 2 hours of cleaning after the place closed. That's with a good head start. Story 34. Environmental health inspectors don't only cover restaurants. I inspect wells and septic systems. I see sewage every day. The worst thing I've seen are old men coming up to their door naked. And what makes it worse is that they knew what date and time I was stopping by. Story 35, kind of the opposite, but my partner's home daycare was inspected once, routine check. No big deal. A day later, the fire marshal returned and informed her that out of all the daycares he had visited the previous day, our house was the only one he'd send his kids to. The fact that he felt compelled to drive out of his way just to come tell that boggles my mind. Story 36? Not a health inspector, but there's one story in Vegas my mom told me about. There's this one bar brilliantly named The Bar, and it has been shut down multiple times. One time it was shut down for being infested with roaches and trying to hide it. One time it was shut down for simply never cleaning anything and having horrible hygiene overall. And more than once it's been shut down for the bartenders doing weird stuff with the drinks. She never elaborated on that part, but from the tone of voice it sounded hot. Then again, none of this is exactly too awful, right? Thing is, that isn't the crazy part. The crazy part is that it keep damn reopening because of popular demand. This place has had huge crowds for years, even though it sucks, and whenever it shuts down, everyone throws a huge damn fit. And a couple months later, it pops back up. And it's not even like the people are stupid and don't know it's a pigsty. They just simply don't damn care. Story 37. I'm not a health inspector, but I've worked in dozens of fast food restaurants in my teens and 20s to know a clean kitchen from a dirty one. I worked for a company that made take-and-bake Chicago-style vegan pizzas in Seattle. Having worked for many fast food restaurants, I was shocked at the following. No ventilation. The pre-cooked the pizza crust in large walk-in ovens, but the ventilation fan above it never worked. So a few times a month, people who go home early from breathing in too much exhaust. No smoke detectors, fire extinguishers anywhere. When a small fire did break out, first words from the boss were, "Why did you call the fire department?" None of the food, be it canned or perishable, was ever dated when it arrived. The dough roller was cleaned only once a month and only by a professional. Working at Pizza Hut, they cleaned it twice a day. Got an oral warning when I took it apart and cleaned with mineral oil I brought with me. Out of a staff of 10 people, me and another worker were the only ones with food handlers' permits. Driver who delivered the pizzas to GFC and Safeway stores had no valid license. Hippie employees built a compost pile for waste, which attracted rats, and when it rained, juices flowed down and under the outdoor walk-in fridge, propped up with cement blocks, creating a cesspool for insects. Hand-washing sink was falling off the wall. Paper towel rack was basically a coat hanger nailed to the wall. On storage racks, chemicals stored above canned and perishable food, cat living in the kitchen, to deal with the rats attracted by the compost pile. Employees dropping pre-cooked crusts on the floor, dusting it off, and using them. Never cleaning the food slicer after slicing up buckets of green peppers, onions, or mushrooms. They had 3 sinks for wash, rinse, and sanitize, but all they did was wash and rinse. When I showed them that they needed to fill that last sink with lukewarm water and half a cap of bleach, they often filled it with hot water, thus making the bleach evaporate quickly and defeat its purpose. When I left that job, I reported them to the health board. Story 38. Not a health inspector, but there's a big kibby-libby in my city right now because the local Cheddar's just got shut down for temporary emergency maintenance because of crap like this. End fryer, and there are 6 roaches straight up on a French fry like it's cool. Moldy vegetable bits all over the floor that never got swept up. I'll never eat there again, even after they reopen under new management. I've been in the restaurant industry for 10 years and I've never seen anything like it. Story 39. Mom's an inspector. My favorite is the woman who bought a bulk bag of rice from China. Starts working her way through it, and the rice starts tasting a little funky. Whatever, it's not too bad, and it was a great deal. Gets 3/4 of the way through the bag and finds a dead bird in the rice. The strange taste was because the rice absorbed the bird juices and preserved the bird. Grossest one is probably the fish place that caught fire but didn't burn down. Turns out public health and the fire department need to go in to condemn the place. Mom comes in with her hard hat and some bulk-ass boots. And the fire chief with her. The smell is horrible. Burnt, rotted fish is probably what hell wishes it could smell like. Maggots everywhere. Fire chief bails in the first 5 minutes to go puke outside. Mom worked in a slaughterhouse and is metal AF. She just mouth breathes her way through it. Then she starts hearing little plinking noises and feeling impacts on her helmet. It was damn maggots on the ceiling falling on her. Place definitely got condemned. Most hilarious was probably a call that came through for a skunk bite. Turns out this toddler was at the grandparents' place on the back, raised patio. Sees a kitty and rushes towards it in excitement. Definitely not a kitty. Skunk sprays the kid full in the face. Kid is screaming, falls on the skunk. Skunk is freaking out and bites the kid. Grandparents are horrified and probably never allowed to babysit the kid again. Saddest, most upsetting are definitely the parents who won't let their kids get rabies vaccines. If you can't quarantine the animal or test the body, you can't know until it's too late. Story 40. Not a health inspector. Surprise, surprise, but there used to be a Chinese restaurant in the same area where I worked. About once a week, they would leave dead fish in the alley behind the store, with flies crawling all over them. They weren't throwing the fish away. They were storing them back there until they could prep them. Story 41. My instructor once witnessed a McDonald's employee, probably 17 years old, use a rag in the bathroom to clean the sink and anywhere else that needed wiping down. She later witnessed the employee later use the same rag to wipe down the counters in front of the cash registers. He was fired on the spot. Story 42. I used to work for a very anal and clean, neat freak. Every damn night we would. Scrub the entire restaurant floor with degreaser and mop over it. Take apart the Coke machine and soak all pieces in vinegar each night. Take apart the dishwasher and clean the parts by hand. Clean the baseboards, clean the windows. Dust. Washed every bucket we kept extra food in. Scrubbed under railing, table, or any ledge. Emptied the cooler. Cleaned and refilled. Cleaned the grill with sulfur. Mopped the bathroom. Scrubbed bathroom walls. Sanitized every surface. Washed the rags we used to clean. Sweep the parking lot. Sanitized the mops after mopping. Once a month, we would be called in on Sunday and we would get up on display ledges, take down decorations, big ones like furniture, dust it, sweep the ledges, scrub every inch of the walls, take apart and clean all appliances and tables for good cleaning. As an employee, it added an hour and a half to closing and really sucked. But by far the cleanest establishment I've ever seen, and I will continue to give them my business. The restaurant is called Neighbor's Mill in Harrison, Arkansas. Story 43. A girl was working at this Mexican restaurant that gave complimentary chips and salsa, which weren't always finished. So the owner had the workers reuse the uneaten chips and serve them to other customers. Girl tells parents, who confronts the owner about it, hopefully not having to go to the media. Legal. Owner pretty much tells them to shove it and that it's none of their business. The girl's parents go to the media, and the place is shortly shut down. Story 44. I'm a health inspector. Actually shut down a restaurant today for failing their inspection. The following are several things I've seen fairly recently at different places, mostly Asian or Indian places. 1. Vent hood so dirty and clogged grease was dripping into the food. Today's restaurant. 2. Moldy food on the cook line about to be served. Today's restaurant. 3. A dead cockroach in the raw shrimp bucket on the cook line. When I pointed it out, the cook fished out the roach with this finger, threw it away, and proceeded to throw some shrimp on the grill like nothing was wrong. 4. A restaurant so infested with roaches. The roaches were crawling over the prepared food, and the waitstaff were just flicking them off, then bringing the plates to the customers. 5. Walked in to do an inspection, and a guy had been living in the restaurant under a table. He had a sleeping bag, all of his life accessories. He was smoking cigarettes, eating all of his food, etc. Under the prep table. 6. A faux restaurant had a giant pot of soup that was room temp, and they just threw whatever meat and veggies and whatever else they didn't use that day into the pot and left it out overnight. This was their base for the faux. The next day, I've only been doing this 4 years and I have hundreds of stories. But enjoy these few. Story 45. I was a quality assurance operative for a major UK chicken factory. One part of my job involved making sure birds were the right temperature before going on the production line, making sure they were fresh according to the spec for each customer, Tesco, Sainsbury's, KFC, etc. Birds were always 10 or 11 degrees centigrade before they even got on the line. Meat that was too old was used. Managers wanted to rush orders out, so they asked you to run around the factory and get a fresh kill label so that meat could be used. Customers thought they were getting fresh meat, but in actual fact, it was 4 or 5 days old. Most chicken portions were bruised black. There was green bile inside most birds that always got sent out. A mouse was inside a set of scales. That was kept quiet. The scales were cleaned and production kept going, instead of all product being brought back and dumped. Nothing was metal detected, and any pack that the metal detector ejected was sent on anyway. Inspector visited for an audit. They showed up early and found dirty machines, mouse droppings, and even a mouse ran over one of the auditor's welly boots. The place is a death trap. It should be shut down. Story 46. Obligatory. Not a health inspector. But you know how sometimes gas stations will also have chain restaurants attached? Well, I stopped at one during a road trip because I needed gas. So this was a pretty small station that had somehow managed to fit a Subway and a pizza station inside. I had decided to pay inside so I could use cash. And while I was waiting in line, I smelled that fresh Subway bread and thought I might have to grab a sandwich too. Then I looked down. There, right by my foot, was an enormous cockroach. Just doing its little cockroach things like hanging out, then flitting away, then peeking its gross head out from under the shelf. This was in the middle of the day, broad daylight with a bunch of people around. They say, if you see a cockroach out during the day, the infestation is bad. The fact that it was acting so casual around a bunch of huge humans was also super concerning. I did not get the sandwich. Story 47. There used to be a restaurant here called the Motor Ant, which was literally a restaurant built around an RV trailer that doubled as part of the dining room. Built around it so that every winter they could just drive away and return in spring. So, while there was quite a few ways we knew from the start the place was failing health codes, the biggest one was the 3 fat, happy, purring cats that had the run of the dining room, including cat beds and towers. Huge violation of health code, but clearly they gave no craps. So I and 2 friends show up, order burgers, sit down, and the cats all wander into our laps and begin purring up a storm while we talked and ate. We tipped extra. Story 48. Taking 10 years as an inspector. Most dangerous is usually not the most disgusting. I've seen entire walk-in coolers they were using at 60 degrees and the staff didn't even notice anything wrong. I've seen piles of mice that died getting stuck in the grease behind the fryer. I've seen staff throwing raw burgers within the grill, then making a salad right after. I've seen squirrels and birds roaming freely inside a bread manufacturer. The stereotypes are true. Chinese restaurant kitchens are almost always filthy. Most common critical violation: dish machine not sanitizing properly. Story 49. Not a health inspector myself, but I got a story. I used to work in a deli at an Italian supermarket in New York. We used to cut everything. Occasionally, someone would drop a huge, barely cut turkey or prosciutto. We were basically trained to act like we were going to throw it out. The customers could clearly see we dropped the meat. We had very low counters. We would take it into the back room, put it on a table, then go open a new one and finish that person's order. After the order, we would just run the turkey under a faucet and say, "Good as new." The floors were disgusting. The floor was just filled with meat, cheese throughout the day, and the dirt, germs for everyone's shoes. We would do a quick 10 minutes mop at the end of the night. Of course, we had roach problems. Funny also, the pest control people would come like once a month in disguise as fire safety inspectors during closing hours of non-busy days. Food for thought. Story 50. Not a health inspector, but witnessed some things at my first job as setup waitress at a banquet hall. The head cook had some hairy arms, and he always mixed the salad with his hands, so you know that hair's getting in there. And one day we found a used Band-Aid in the... Story 51. Mom worked for a hospital. Case after case of food poisoning came in with one thing in common. A local restaurant had a lobster dinner special. Health inspectors went in and found that they were dumping the half-used clarified butter back in the pot in the serving area as they cleared the tables. Story 52. Not a health inspector, but used to work in a pub restaurant. We used to serve sauces, like ketchup, French mustard, in little ramekins, rather than allow people to choose how much they wanted from the bottle. The ramekins were never cleaned, or the sauces emptied. We were told just to fill them up on top of the old sauce. I was only about 15 at the time, but remember thinking it was disgusting. People would lick tomato ketchup spoons and put them back in the pot, and we'd just fill it up. The French mustard at the bottom of the pots was hard and black. Maybe I'm oversensitive. Story 53. I'm not one, but I've seen some crap. Just a couple months ago, our town had decided to post the low-scoring restaurants on the front of the papers. They were organized in colors. So like yellow and mild, blue was bad, and red was just nope. Our rival restaurant serves similar food and is 5 minutes away. Got a 70 red point violation. Story 54. Not a health inspector, but I was visiting a friend in Colorado and his roommate came home from a taco place in Denver. He unwrapped a napkin to show us a tooth that was in his taco. The guy still ate all of his tacos even after nearly swallowing a tooth. We tried to tell him he should have made a complaint, but he was so nonchalant about it. Blah. Story 55. In Australia, we have this website called Name and Shame. It's official, and it lists the restaurants and takeaway shops that have been issued fines and what they got in trouble for. It's pretty great. I wish every state and country would do this as well. Story 56. Good that we don't have working health inspectors in my country. Otherwise, you will have enough content to run for a month, based on experiences people had after looking at the kitchen of the restaurant where they ate. Story 57. Not a health inspector, but I repair cooking equipment. Walk into a job at Chinese restaurant. The cook is sitting on the toilet, taking a dump in full view of the world, whilst shelling peas. Story 58. Received complaint about Chinese restaurant that served a lady a fully cooked mouse in her takeout container. I was pretty skeptical at first after she told me over the phone. She froze the container and brought it into our office. Somehow they did not notice that a mouse fell into the fryer while they were cooking and proceeded to box it up. Story 59. My buddy quit a job at a big chain restaurant because he was a dishwasher, and when he drained the sink at the end of his shift, there was a full chicken breast. His manager told him to wash it off and put it in the fridge. He threw it out, got in an argument with the manager and quit. Said he would never eat at that place again. Then it mysteriously shut down a couple months later. Story 60. Not a health inspector, but I used to work at a quick-serve restaurant with a girl who smelled and looked like she never showered and proceeded to not wear gloves while prepping food. She had the nastiest damn fingernails and would stick her finger into taste and put her licked finger back into whatever she was making. Story 61. Worked at a restaurant and the chef would smoke inside the kitchen, and I have seen him accidentally ash in the mashed potatoes and just stir it around a little bit more. I ate once at the restaurant and got food poisoning, so even though I got free food working there, I would still bring food from home. Besides, everyone was a smoker there, and no cleaning hands before touching the food. Story 62. An employee at a strip mall was having a cigarette break and filmed a Chinese buffet worker stomping and crushing garlic in a pail with ratty Nikes on. The restaurant closed after the video was posted. Health inspectors of Reddit, what are the vilest conditions you've ever seen in a restaurant? Story 1. Walked into a Mexican restaurant one time and saw some lady soaking some tripe in a mop sink. Saw that and told them to throw all of it in the dumpster and bleach it in front of me. My boss had seen a restaurant defrosting raw shrimp in a mop sink with the mop deed over the faucet. My other coworker had to work a foul odor complaint where this Chinese buffet was closed for about a week without utilities. He walked in and found the food was still in the buffet line. He said the stench was so rotten that he immediately threw up upon opening the door. The food was stewing in its juices for a week in the Texas summer heat. Those are the worst ones that I can think of ATM. Story 2. One of the news channels where I live does a weekly segment called Restaurant Report Card. It shows the good and bad deck reports of the week. There was one Chinese restaurant that had live chickens in the kitchen. Story 3 was a tradesman working on a hotel, a fine city in Alberta. The reason I was working on it was because a new owner was renovating, updating the hotel. The restaurant had a salad bar. Every single member of the kitchen staff got fired when the new owner discovered that the salad bar hadn't been cleaned, sterilized in months. They just kept adding more food on top of the old stuff. Story 4. Former health inspector here and current third-party food safety auditor. A few things that come to mind. 1. Grocery store so infested with rodents that an entire group of them was living in the dairy cooler. You know there had to be a lot of them in the store if some were resorting to living in a cold room. 2. Chinese restaurant getting ready to open for lunch. I walked in and temped the items in the walk-in cooler. All were well above acceptable temperatures. Cooler had broken down in the night and was no longer functioning. They wanted to serve the food anyway. I had to embargo the entire cooler worth of food and stood there as they filled trash bag after trash bag with meat and took it to the dumpster. As I was leaving the location, I drove around to the back, and they had employees pulling it all out of the trash and dragging it back into the building. Had to stop them, make them return it to the dumpster, and pour straight bleach all over the food to ensure it could not be used. 3. Restaurant so infested with cockroaches that when the manager greeted me at the host stand to take me to the kitchen, he had a roach crawl across his back right in front of me. 4. Observed people smoking in the kitchens and in meat departments of grocery stores. Also observed folks using chewing tobacco and keeping their spit cups on the food prep surfaces. Most of the stuff we think is disgusting isn't necessarily what the general public would even notice. A lot revolves around hand washing. If you really watch someone during food production and see all the things they touch and then attempt to handle ready-to-eat foods, it's disgusting. People just don't even think about hand washing like they should. I know I have a bunch more. I'll update as I think of it all. Story 5. Not a health inspector, but when I worked at Subway, we caught a coworker doing something inappropriate. My manager had to look at the camera for some unrelated reason. He is skipping forward and accidentally goes to far forward. He notices a worker putting a bin of tuna on the floor. He keeps looking at the tape. The worker pulls his pants down and proceeds to enter the bin of tuna. He makes sweet love to the tuna, finishes up, goes into the bathroom to clean off, proceeds to smooth out the bin of tuna, wraps it back up and puts it in the fridge. My manager immediately has me throw out the tuna and make more. Needless to say, he was fired. And while this was 20 years ago, I still can't eat tuna I didn't make or see made. Story 6. My friend in school talked about how trash the place he works at is. He said stuff like, if someone drops a slice of pizza, they'll pick it up and serve it to the next guy. They'll do this with all their food. The restaurant part is fancy, but the kitchen is a mess and nobody really cleans it. How they're still in business? Well, when the first health inspector comes, they'll fail and they have a certain amount of time to correct it. Then the supervisor of the inspectors comes, who is good friends with the restaurant owner. He passes the restaurant either way. Story 7. Not inspector, but cook. One very popular local restaurant has the worst roach infestation ever. If you picked up the ticket printer and tapped it on the table, you would have 60 baby roaches scatter. Roaches everywhere you look. They would fall from the ceiling or crawl onto the plate of food before the server could take it out. It was the most disgusting place. I quit and it's still super popular and still buggy. Story 8. Not a health inspector, but I worked at an ice cream shop when I was 15. My boss found a mini fridge in an abandoned, closed-down elderly home. There was still food in there, with cottage cheese that expired 3 years prior to me opening it. She gave me 2 bottles of bleach and said, go to town. Now, I pleaded with her not to keep the fridge, not because I had to do the Charlie work on it, but because it was damn nasty, even if we did get rid of the mold that was literally eating the interior of the fridge. I didn't feel right putting food in there and selling that food to customers. Cleaned it anyway and put it out on the floor, but refused to put stuff in there. When people put stuff in it, I'd throw it away or move it, depending on what it was. I also had to negotiate with my boss on how often she'd let me clean the fryolator grease. I wanted to do it once a day, but ended up only getting a once-a-week approval, which was better than once a season, like she had been. Story 9. Not a health inspector, but I deliver beer, so I see the backs of many restaurants on a day-to-day basis as we're dropping product in their storage areas. The worst was a buffet that had an inescapable smell of hot, rotten milk. Not sure how I even know what that smells like, but it was like they had been microwaving rotten milk for an hour and left it somewhere. I had to leave the delivery. My coworker was sick with a stuffy nose and did the delivery for me as I gagged outside. Talked to a couple coworkers later that week, and they agreed that place always has a weird smell. Story 10. Not a health inspector, but worked at a restaurant that was barely skirting by on health inspections. We had a big roach problem, but we did a good job keeping them out of the actual food, which I guess is the big thing they look for with health inspections. The most egregious issue, though, was the time I was making milkshakes and accidentally hit my arm on the metal counter. Well, I didn't notice how bad the hit was until I saw blood in the ice cream tub. Being a responsible person, I go to throw the ice cream out when the manager interrupts me. saying I should go use the first aid kit and they'll take care of the ice cream. Well, I come back to the same tub of ice cream returned to the freezer, but the blood STD out of it. They kept using the ice cream. I want to clarify that they STD the blood out before continuing to use the ice cream. They did not serve my blood with ice cream. Story 11. I worked at a McDonald's that was just about to get rebuilt and had just narrowly passed inspection. What does this mean? The owner doesn't want to replace anything because the store is about to get torn down. So the whole place went to crap. A drunk person flushed a pair of underwear in the bathroom and clogged the sewage once, causing sewage to come up through the drains in the kitchen and stock rooms. We still serve food. Then the stock room, where we keep a lot of food items, had a ceiling cave in, and fiberglass insulation was dangling less than a foot away from food products on shelves. We were regularly pulling trash cans from the lobby and kitchen anytime it rained to help contain rainwater from leaks in the ceiling back in the stockroom. I left last November. The store doesn't get torn down for another month, so I can only imagine how crafty it is now. Story 12. Former inspector and, I could write a book. 1. Burger King had raw sewage coming out of the drain ankle high. Employees acted like it was normal. 2. Taco Bell had a fly problem. Customer brought back a taco with a live fly inside. 3. Mold in ice machines. Seen some with gobs and gobs of pink mold oozing in the ice off from the ice blades. 4. Poppy's Chicken serving rotten gray chicken. Stank like death. 5. Chick-fil-A raw sewage back up in kitchen with the owner wiping sweat off his face and continue making sandwiches. 6. Popeye's Chicken where the whole building was slanted and about to fall over and still operating. 7. Popeye's Chicken who knew who I was and spit in my food. 8. Lots of broken coolers and temperature-abused foods. 9. Taco Bell with no AC in summer. No coolers worked and employees were sweating into food. Upper management kept delaying AC repairs. AC was fixed 3 days after inspection. 10. Watched a GM pull a spatula out of dirty sink water to flip burger patties. Scratches her ass while handling the burger. Be very wearily of foreigners buying restaurants. They are the worst. Story 13. Not the worst, but never ate there after this. First week in Canada, I went into Popeyes, as who doesn't like mashed potatoes. They were cleaning when I walked in, and there was a guy with a pressurized hose blasting the floor, and the water was spraying everywhere. The fine mist of grim floor water could be seen coating the food waiting in the pass, the prep tables. Everywhere in that tiny space was just getting blasted with floor goop. Story 14. Not an inspector, but witnessed something gross. I worked for a company that had a lunchroom with an older woman who cooked our breakfast and lunch. I think she was friends of the owners. She would bring in a daily special, like chili, but also made sandwiches and whatnot. We had out-of-town customers, and when lunchtime came around, the secretaries would set up lunch in a conference room by the lunchroom, and the lady would make something special just for them. So I'm taking away plates after these people had eaten and bringing them to the lunchroom for lunch lady to load dishwasher. Now, not everyone had finished their meals. It was chicken and rice this day. It was rather late, and an employee had come in asking her to make him something. I'm going back and forth doing my thing, and I see her SC the leftover food back into the pot, from several plates. I couldn't believe my eyes, so I just stare with question marks floating over my head. Then I hear her ask the guy, who was reading something, so not looking at her, if he wants chicken and rice. He says sure, and she makes him a plate of leftover food she eskees off the plates I gave her. I should have said something, but I noped out of there real quick. It bothered the heck out of me, so I confessed to a coworker, and she's all, "You have to tell the boss." I did. It escalated to the owners, and lunch lady was fired. Story 15. Former employee of a few food, drink-related places, rat, roach droppings in the pizza boxes. Fry cook dropping things and picking them back up to fry. He reasoned that the oil was hot enough to burn off anything. The oil was changed only weekly, if not bi-weekly sometimes. Ice cream shop where no hairnets or gloves were offered, needed, so manager's hair ended up in ice cream. Also, questionably clean hands making cones. Slime, mold colonies. Not growth, damn civilizations. In the ice makers and soda spouts at a whole chain of gas stations. A fike, I was the only one who ever cleaned those at my location alone. And whenever I babysat another store, also, the coffee urns. Black bottoms and grinds caked on inside. Story 16. I was in the training program to be a state health inspector after I graduated from college. The majority of the inspections weren't memorable and small stuff got written up, like temps being too low or high, not having gloves accessible, storing meat boxes on the ground, etc. The TWP inspections that I remember being horrible were both at low-end Chinese places and strip malls. In one inspection, the wok chef had an overflowing ashtray right next to the meat bins. Odent droppings. Piles of dead flies behind the range. Open doors to the outside. Just nasty. We also had to check soda machines and the hoses and guns. The soda gun line at one place was so caked with mold and funk, it was a miracle that soda could even get through. We couldn't figure out how any previous inspector had missed that, or what the heck happened. The soda gun was the worst because it ruined eating out and having a mixed drink. I'll never be able to drink anything out of a soda gun ever again. I got a better job offer after 2 months of that and ran out of that job. Story 17. My mother briefly became the head of the health inspection for our county. I recall 2 good stories. First, she noted that even though there were many violations, there seemed to be no punishment from the department for restaurants that forced them to fix these things, except for new restaurants. She asked why. Their response was that these restaurant owners are our friends. If we punish them or fine them or send out a violation notice, they might not like us anymore. She tried to fix that, but story 3 below got in the way. Second, and this is just awesome, so I am sharing it. A house, not a restaurant, had a sewage problem. It was backing up, and the neighbors finally got the county to investigate. They decided that the septic tank and field were backed up, so they forced the homeowner to dig it up and reinstall a new one, a few $1,000s even back in the day. When they finally got it exposed, they discovered the homeowner has backed a short school bus into a trench 10 or 20 years before and has the sewage going into a window in the front behind the driver's seat and had cracked open the back door to allow it to drain. It was full. Third, there was a dude, old dude, who was close to retirement. He was a crap stain. He was verbally and sexually abusive to the staff. The inspector's not my mother, who is, well, matronly. What she did do is fire his ass. But the county board rehired him since he was close to retirement. After he attacked some of the women in the office, she fired him again. This is like month 2 of the job. And then 5 people on the county board and her all had flat tires the same day. And they discovered that each of them had a box of nails emptied at the bottom of their driveway. So the county board rehired the git. She quit. Story 18. To make you feel better, I used to work at Costco, and the place was really clean. The ice cream machine was dismantled and cleaned at least every week. It took 2 hours each time. The fryer emptied and clean every day. In the food court, we would spend hours on cleaning alone. The meat department was hosed down with disinfectant and scrubbed every day. Someone was hired just to clean the bakery department during the evening. The health inspector was seen shopping there a couple of times, which I think was good news. I may not have a great experience working there, but I know it's clean. Story 19. Worked at McDonald's. The McAfee machines were the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life. So much mold and slime and disgust. The first time I cleaned the machine, I never ordered a McAfee drink again. Just another day at McDonald's. Story 20. I've got quite a few. Mexican restaurants, Chinese, and Italian restaurants are typically the most egregious offenders, which sucks because their food is usually the most delicious, as long as you're okay with potentially pass later from it. I've only ever closed down one restaurant. It's actually much harder in most places than you would imagine. Lots of red tape that prevent field staff and even managers from using their professional judgment in the service of public health. A pizza place was operating without a permit at one point in time. I had drafted a letter stating that, and before I went out to hand deliver it, I got a complaint notification. Someone had eaten their pizza the day before, and their son had felt glass, or something that felt like pulverized glass, in his pizza. Backing up for a moment to the red tape thing, we're not legally allowed to investigate or inspect restaurants who don't have a permit. You can thank the U.S. Constitution for that. You can see the dilemma. We decide the best course of action is to deliver the letter saying they're operating illegally and that it would be in the best interest of their business and the public health to allow us to investigate the nature of the complaint. After I get permission to go in and take a look around, I'm appalled. The manager has fingernails that extend probably half an inch beyond the nail bed, and they're caked in flour and other ingredients. The other employee there has dirty bandages all over his fingers. Both of these characters are dressed in filthy uniforms. The walk-in cooler has loads of uncovered foods sitting beneath stalactites of mold, all beneath a ceiling of black filamentous fungi. The pizza prep table has broken doors, hinges, and is covered with what I can only describe as putrefied ingredients from 2003. It clearly hasn't been cleaned since then. The plastic Lexan containers holding the food items in the cooler are all breaking apart and chipping. At this point, I've got a few ideas as to what that guy found in his pizza, and I don't think any of them are glass. It's probably a fingernail or a Band-Aid or plastic or maybe broken metal from the cooler itself. Then I see it. The most disgusting can opener I've ever seen. To put it in perspective, mounted can openers are like the low-hanging fruit of every health inspector. They're almost always out of compliance. And writing one up will make you look like a try-hard git who's out to get the restaurant owner in trouble. They're usually not a big deal. Except this one. This one is absolutely caked in dried, vile pizza sauce goop that is turned black with age. The blade itself is so dull and chipped, it is literally peeling metal filaments off into a mass next to the blade. Every time this thing is used to open a new pizza sauce, which, by the way, is put into a cracked plastic container and covered with a trash bag to keep the loads of flies away, it deposits metal chips, flakes, filaments, whatever you want to call it, into that sauce and into the bellies of the customers. Needless to say, I was appalled. I had the person in charge call the store owner, who pleaded with me to let him stay open. Given that they didn't even have a permit to be open in the first place, this was a no-go. I went back the next day with backup, and we formally closed them for operation until they could get everything back into working order. Surprised, they called the next day saying everything is fixed, and I can't believe it, but it was. Managerial lack of control aside, they must have spent $1,000 and 16 hours into cleaning this place. The one dude even clipped his fingernails. Success story? Maybe. Gross example of what you get with second-rate, poorly managed restaurants, definitely. They're lucky no one has yet passed from eating there. Story 21. All right, my turn. First things first, insert obligatory, not a health inspector, but here. I've been a food service worker for quite a few years now and have worked at many different chains in the industry. So trust me when I say I have seen some crap. About 13 years ago, I was working at a McDonald's as overnight maintenance with a friend of mine, who shall remain nameless for reasons that will become obvious very quickly. The two of us were always there from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So naturally, we were basically on the honor system aside from the cameras, and they had to trust us to do our jobs. Out of the two of us, I took my job pretty seriously, whereas the other guy was just trying to make some money, I guess. Was schizophrenic, and at the time, to my knowledge, was not medicated for it. On one of our shifts, as I was doing the setup for breakfast and sweeping and mopping the kitchen, I realized I hadn't seen the other dude for about an hour. He was supposed to be doing dishes, but usually you had to walk around the store to put the dishes away. So, unfortunately, my curiosity got the best of me and I set out looking for him. When I rounded the corner to the dish pit, I saw something I wish I hadn't. This guy is doing his dishes, naked. Like no ducks given at all. No shoes, which is dangerous and gross as hell. No apron to keep the scalding hot water from hitting his junk. Nothing. Just big smile on his face, and that was it. I told him to get his clothes back on and get his crap together and rewash and sanitize the dishes. He obliges, and I figured very much so incorrectly that would be the end of it. About an hour later, after I'd verified he had done the stuff I had asked in terms of dishes, I went back to the break room to take my last 10-minute break of the night. The crew room was where we stored the buns for all the sandwiches. Well, as I turned the corner expecting to have to squeeze by a large rack of buns, I'm greeted, again, by a different set of buns than I was expecting. Again, this man is naked. Only this time he has his junk in a honey wheat bun and is staring with a big grin at it in the mirror. I obviously was pretty mad because now twice in one shift, I've seen some things I should never have to see in a restaurant. This time I just straight up yelled, "What the heck are you doing?" His response was that he was checking to see if his junk was bigger than a honey wheat bun. He then put it right back in with the rest of the buns and walked away to the manager's office to write a threatening letter to the boss. I waited till he walked away and then quickly destroyed the entire rack of buns and left a note for the boss about what happened got rid of his threatening note. He got fired a few months later. Yeah, months. For eating in front of a customer, even though the manager clearly saw his naked on camera. Story 22. Just a few things that stick out in my memory. 1. There was a restaurant that had super greasy walls due to not turning on their ventilation system. They also had a cockroach problem. The cockroaches got stuck in that layer of dusty grease. After they got cited for excessively soiled walls and a roach problem, their solution was to paint directly over the grease and bugs, leaving a bumpy, pitted layer of black paint. 2. Got a complaint that a restaurant was holding a deer in their walk-in cooler. I find said whole deer, hooves, and fur and all. He said he got it from the mall. I asked the owner for a receipt, benefit of a doubt here, and he gives me a police report to collect roadkill. He wanted to clean the thing in his restaurant, ticks and all, and bring the meat home. 3. An outdoor festival was organized at an expo center, and the coordinators brought a few refrigerated semi-trucks to hold the foods as the prepared 2 days in advance. It was the middle of summer, and the reefer trucks they hired were plain old semi-trailers. They also used the expo center's trash cans to hold the massive volume of food they were prepping, which happened to be plain old trash cans that were used to pick up after a dog show from last week. I think in the end, one of the coordinators said they were looking at over $20,000 worth of food discarded. 4. I covered a day in someone else's area, and one restaurant had a tiny bird cage with a single canary in the windowless back office. The owner called it his therapy bird and had refused to bring it home. Instead, he agreed to write in SOP, where this bird is kept in his office and the door shut so the feathers dander can't get out. Not a gross condition necessarily, but I feel really bad for that poor bird. 5. A coworker had to investigate. Complaint called in my A-Food employee at a hospital saying they were forced to work in an ankle-deep sewage backup. The backup was confirmed, and he said he could see the bodies of sewer worms slithering around. 6. There was a cereal floor crafter at this coffee place. I'd get complaints in multiple times a week over the span of several months, and the manager was aware that a customer came in like clockwork and shat in the middle of the bathroom floor. Not much I could do besides making sure the spot gets cleaned properly. 7. There was a buffet that was closed by the department. The staff and management had a severe language barrier between themselves and the inspectors. Inspectors took pictures of the conditions over recurring inspections. And over the months, you could see the food on the floor get trampled and decompose without being moved. Old pans of food were poured into the new ones, and the roach infestation extended to the dining room, under the tables, and buffet steam tables. The 2 walk-in coolers went down repeatedly, and it stank like death. Many times the place was cited since the operators couldn't identify foods, gray rotten meat, moldy foods. Story 23. Not an inspector, but my town has the inspection reports posted on a regular basis. I'm not sure how this place wasn't shut down. Non-critical violation, observation, observed holes in floor, wall junction, access point for mice, rats, at service counter, under grill, and above back door, floor tiles cracked at back, near 3 vat sink, ceiling tile falling in bathroom, sagging under debris and rodent poop. Non-critical violation, observation, harborage conditions exist. Story 24. Okay, so my dad was a health and hygiene officer in the Air Force back in the early 50s and was stationed in England. His job included inspecting kitchen and latrine facilities at bases, overseeing quarantine on troops returning home from Europe, and doing health inspections on said troops. He and some fellow officers were on leave in London and decided to have lunch at a pub that was advertising a soup and sandwich deal. They sit down to piping hot bowls of tomato soup and are talking and eating when one of the guys says, good soup, nice and meaty." Everyone stops talking as it sinks in that tomato soup should not have meat in it, and my dad reluctantly digs his spoon to the bottom of his bowl and comes up with several well-cooked cockroaches. Being trained in such things, they stormed into the kitchen and confirmed that the place had their soup heating on a back burner uncovered and directly below a cold water pipe. The rising steam condenses on the pipe, makes it slippery, and causes whatever scurry across it to fall into the soup. They yelled at the owner and reported the place, but beyond that, they couldn't do much about the unexpected protein. Story 25. I used to work in food service distribution as a director of operations. A few times a year, I would ride with salespeople, meet with customers, make sure their service was good, all that. I was riding with our top sales guy, and we had visited some of our most important accounts. Then we stopped at this little diner that he sold because it was basically right between a few big customers, and it was easy to service. When we got there, the owner was in the process of adding on to his kitchen. All of the coolers and freezers were outside on his back deck, covered in pine needles and dust. He stopped hammering nails for a few minutes to chat with us. Then a waitress came out and told him she needed a lobster roll and fries. He went into the kitchen, took off his giant muck boots, and set them on the end of the counter. His small dog ran around his ankles and eventually hopped on the counter. The owner did not wash his hands, made the lobster roll, fed some meat to the dog. The dog licked his fingers. He then went back to plating the meal, hit the bell, "Order up," and went back to working on his addition. I actually gagged and almost puked in my mouth. Also, most of the Chinese restaurants I visited were horrific. Chinese trade was tough to break into. They were getting most of their stuff from Niuai or Ma on spray-painted dirty box trucks with no refrigeration. The trucks would arrive with several guys riding in the back and 3 in the cab. They'd unload all of the stuff, and it was probably kept at about 60 degrees all the way to me from NY. In the kitchen, there would be buckets of raw chicken with flies buzzing around. Employees would drop stuff on the floor, pick it up, and throw it back in, stuff like that. It was gross as hell. Story 26. Not an inspector, but the Chinese place across my street got shut down because they were caught putting the leftover foods onto new plates and reserving. Story 27. My dad's last girlfriend was a health inspector, and you would be shocked at the number of restaurants that would rather paint their walls to cover up the dirt and grime than actually do regular cleanings. She doesn't eat at restaurants anymore. Story 28. Not a health inspector, but worked at a food place. I picked up a case of wings to be dropped in the grease, but when I took the lid off, they smelled bad. And then when I saw the red liquid at the bottom was a dark brown instead of a bright red, I instantly started heading to the back to throw them out. My manager caught me on my way back there and said nothing was wrong with the wings. He sprayed water on them and put them in the grease. It was truly disgusting. Story 29. Okay, finally I have a story. I got this. I worked as a waiter in a Vietnamese restaurant. Owners and staffs are all Chinese. The place is actually pretty clean and well run, and then one day, a regular came in with a bad cold. Order a large pho and our popular whole coconut juice. Make a hole in the coconut and stick a straw in it. Anyone who had drink hot soup while sick would know that you produced a lot of mucus right after, of which the dude spitted into the coconut. I cleaned the table and tossed the coconut into the trash bin along with his other mucus-covered paper napkins, food bits from other tables, etc. About 5 minutes later, another waitress came by and fished it out of the garbage bin, put it on the dirty dish cart inside the soup-filled dish tray. I asked what she is doing, and she just laughed awkwardly and walked away. I was curious enough to keep an eye on the coconuts. The dishwasher was the father of the manager of the restaurant. He came by, Cut the coconut open with the cleaver, same one that is used to cut open fresh coconut, cut meat, etc. Wash the coconut with water and SCD the mucus out with his bare hands. Took a spoon, SC out the coconut meat that lines the coconut, wrapped it up with cling wrap, and placed it inside the little fridge below the smoothie station. The meat then was used to make the popular coconut smoothie. I confronted the old man about it, who got really indignant and demanded that I made a coconut smoothie with coconut from that batch. A coconut batch can make 3 smoothie. Then he drank it right in front of me. See? Totally no problem. I quit soon after, but I also never saw the old man washed his hands. Story 30. Health inspector here. 1. Just shut down a place due to a severe cockroach infestation. 2. Shut down a restaurant a while back as there was a severe rodent infestation. I'm talking poop everywhere, in the utensil bins, on the food prep surfaces, just everywhere. Owners were brushing it aside as they worked. Live mice stuck to glue traps under sinks, etc. 3. Another rodent infestation. Owner just left cardboard boxes of open poison throughout the restaurant. Although we can order a place closed, it doesn't happen that often. We try to educate first and work with operators. Having said that, sometimes a ticket or closure order is the only thing that will work. Most places I inspect are pretty decent. A lot of what we see is lack of safe food handling procedures and hand washing. That is, preparing raw chicken with gloves on, placing gloved hands right into the flour, tossing the chicken, touching sink taps, cooler doors, etc., with no hand washing. Also, cultural backgrounds and the way food was prepared back home does not meet standards in Canada. FYI, we also inspect personal services, nail salons, tattoo shops, etc., drinking water system, private septic systems, and pools. Story 31. I'm not a health inspector anymore, but when I was, the worst calls I ever did were always for hoarding complaints. 2 of the worst ones. 1. This guy didn't want to get evicted, so he barred the entrance to his unit. In order to punish the landlord for evicting him, he destroyed all of the plumbing in his unit so that water was just pouring from every fixture, toilet, faucet, etc. When we finally got in there, the sheriffs came and used a sledgehammer to knock down the door. There was at least a 1 inches thick layer of mold on literally every surface in the unit. Tables, walls, ceiling, whatever. Just caked in mold. I don't know how that guy survived in there. 2. Another hoarding call. We were talking to this guy who was obviously suffering from dementia or something about the complaints of cockroaches from his unit, and I look in his kitchen and see that he has every element on his stove on high with nothing on them. Just glowing red elements. Piled right next to the stove, hundreds of cardboard boxes. Literally less than 6 inches away from the stove. I'm pretty sure if we hadn't happened to have shown up that day, he would have burnt his apartment building down. Story 32. Not a health inspector, but one of the Starbucks in my city had roaches. They closed, fumigated, and reopened. Still roaches. So they do it again and use more bombs. Still roaches. At a complete loss, they leave traps everywhere to try to control the problem. One day, one of the baristas disassembled an espresso bar to deep clean it. Roaches everywhere. That's right. One of the bars they use every day had had roaches in it for weeks, and they were pulling espresso on it. People were drinking it. That was ducked up. Story 33. I've never understood how the filth happens. I worked for 3 years for Concordia Language Villages as a cook. We sanitized every surface after every touch. We sanitized all equipment after every use. We washed our hands after touching anything. Touch a table, you didn't just sanitize yourself. Wash your hands, scratch your face, wash your hands. Set a knife down, wash your hands. Touch the steamer even though you just cleaned it, wash your hands. Put an apron on, wash your hands. Wash dishes, wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands. Every single thing is washed down top to bottom multiple times a day. Hands and knees on the floor with a green scrubby around the tilt skillet. Hood scrubbed down and sanitized. Everything, all day. It's not hard. A crew of 3 can keep up fine for 3 services of 150. I see the restaurants on Kitchen Nightmares and I'm blown away. All you have to do is clean. It's not hard. You do it so often that you don't even know you're doing it. Stop with the gloves. Gloves get dirty too. Just wash and wash and wash. If I put a glove on and stick my finger up my ass, it's not clean anymore. Turn around and washing your hands in the hand washing station that was put there for a reason. Now do it nonstop. Now your hands are clean. I don't want your nasty ass gloves touching my sandwich. Story 34. Not a health inspector, but I've been beau for 15, and I've seen some things. Worked at a beer and wing joint, let's call it Boobies, where I watched the sauce guy lose a wing from his bowl and hockey sack it back into the bowl before it hit the ground. I don't feel like this should need more explanation, but kitchen crew worked Crocs or gross AF. His name was Nasty Nate. Worked at a popular swanky diner in downtown Charleston where they had kitchens up and downstairs. Produce was kept upstairs, but employees were too lazy to carry boxes downstairs, so they would throw them off the second floor landing, then pick, and sometimes SC, them up off the asphalt outside the back door. Once worked at a family-owned pizza joint, where I watched a kid individually blowing bags open to fill them with cookies for a catering order, as in, he was putting the bags to his mouth and puffing a blast of air into them to prepare them for cookie insertion. I worked at a 60-year-old Charleston BBQ joint where I watched my manager drop a pan of mac and cheese into, at least, 3-week-old steam tray water. He fished out the pan, poured off the brackish liquid, and put it back in the steam table. Don't worry, I came behind him and threw it away. Story 35. A friend of mine is a director of health in a small Massachusetts city. He explains that cultural differences can play a big part in restaurant food handling practices. He's seen just off the boat Chinese workers drop loads of cooked rice on the floor and pick it up in front of him, intending to still use it. These people he interacts with come from very poor areas, and the thought of throwing out that rice would seem absurd. Story 36. Not a health inspector, but cook. When I was going to culinary school, our sanitation and nutrition instructor was a health inspector. He would tell us horror stories about some of the worst places he had been to. There are two that come immediately to mind. One of them was a bakery that he showed slides of to us. Their sheet pans were filthy, as well as all their bun racks. Their floor was cement, but you could tell that there was a layer of grime covering it. Pretty gross in general. But then he got to the slide of a rat that had been smashed into the floor. Instead of picking up the dead rat and disposing of it, they would just repeatedly run the rat over with their bun racks. The second one was a pizza shop that he was inspecting. The guy making the pizza kept going from the line to the walk-in to get pizza sauce. When he inspected the walk-in, he found a 5-gallon bucket sitting on the floor with the lid halfway off. He picked the lid up and found the sauce, as well as a 3-inch layer of fuzzy mold on top that the cook had just folded over to get to the sauce. Story 37. Former city employee. I used to oversee code enforcement. I got a call from one of my inspectors that he swore a dead body was in a garage. Turns out the lady living in the condo was a street food vendor, and they take a pig and were aging, drying the pork in the garage, and the drippings were seeping out under the garage door. There was a car in the garage that they had just covered with cardboard, but it had been there for years, and had built up a thick-ass lour of dirt and meat juice. There were buckets of rendered fat that, when instructed to dispose of, they pushed back because that's what they used to make tamales. Needless to say, that crap wasn't fresh. They tried to dump it into the side yard planting area. Turns out that's where they disposed of lots of stuff, so we had to have someone come out and dig it up and remove the soil. Not super gross until you think that this git was the lady who sold tamales to lots of the people at City Hall. So yeah, I love street food, but I don't trust it anymore. Story 38. I'm not a health inspector, but I used to wash dishes in a Vietnamese restaurant in Australia. You know those little dishes of dipping sauce you get with your cold rolls? They kept those in big plastic buckets with no lid over them under the work tables where they prepared all the meat and vegetables. Food scraps, dust, dish soap would fall into it and sink to the bottom. They changed those buckets once every 2 weeks, and every time I cleaned those buckets, I would find about a dozen cockroaches. Enough food scraps to cook a meal. And so many strands of hair. Now onto the dishes. I try to clean what I wash to a point where I feel like I'm not putting someone's life in danger. But when things are busy and there's no time for dishes to dry, the cooks will wipe the dishes with these disgusting rugs to dry them off. They offered free lunch and dinner, but I always went out to buy my own food. Never eaten at a Vietnamese restaurant after I worked in one ever again. Story 39. Worked as a manager for a diner a few years ago. Cooks had no idea about food safety. Steaks just sitting on storage racks with no cover on them. Crap like that. But the worst part is that they had a health inspection, and the owner wouldn't let me see it. Well, when she left, I found a copy of it in the recycling bin. Rats. Damn rats in the damn ceiling. I couldn't believe it. So when I closed the place down, I decided to go up to the attic. I barely opened up the hatch in the ceiling and could hear scurrying around immediately. I then turned the flashlight on my phone on, and there were hundreds of them all backed into the corners and covered in what looked like beef tallow that had been caught in the vent system but was leaking into the attic. Damn that. I quit on the spot. Don't know how that place is still open. Story 40. I worked as the only health inspector for 2 counties. They normally had 2, but the pay was terrible, and it was in the middle of nowhere, so it took forever to find a replacement when my coworker left. I was also expected to do well in septic inspections on top of inspecting all places that served food in 2 counties. Needless to say that I and all previous inspectors were incredibly overwhelmed. So, the things I found were pretty horrendous. The worst things I can think of at the moment are 1. An overflowing grease trap that was spilling rotting grease onto the bags of syrup that flow into soda dispensers. 2. A walk-in filled with meat that hadn't been at below temp in weeks and was filled with rotting meat. 3. A restaurant that was always serving rotten food. I'm not sure how many times. I had to revisit that place, and they always had the same violations for moldy and rotten food. 4. A bar that had no way to sanitize anything. No hot water and no chemical sanitizer. Story 41. So my mom is a health inspector and was inspecting a donut shop in California and saw someone changing a diaper on the dough prep table. Their excuse was, "What? We're not open yet." Also, so many cockroaches in Chinese restaurants. I think I've posted this story before, but I feel this belongs here. Story 42. When I worked at McDonald's in high school, we had a code. If the cashier sent back an order for a burger with ice, the grill guys would befoul the food. Half our shift got fired one night when a swing manager was caught slapping 2 beef patties on his bare-ass cheeks while squatting over an open bun on the floor and pretending he was creping on them. It was for a happy meal. Same swing manager used to build McNuggets forts and then knock them down with his junk before boxing and serving them. He also took great pride in that he used the walk-in cooler as a place to fart. I haven't eaten in a McDonald's since. Story 43. I'm not an inspector, but I delivered pizzas for a couple of months for a big chain, not the game, but the one with the red roof. Came in after a delivery one day to find a manager using a hose to clean out a garbage can. Not totally abnormal, but the gross part was that he had the garbage can propped on the wing prep station. Story 44. I was a cook for a while at a Denny's. I am the type of person that looks at the details of the business to learn more when I am there, especially when I am bored. For example, you have to change out the warm, cold tables every 2 hours. So I read up on why and how to do it properly, etc. Anyway, got asked one day to help the waitstaff with some of their side work since I wasn't busy. I pulled their tea urns to clean them. One of them had not been cleaned in so long, it had green moss-looking stuff about 1 inch of an inch thick. I scrubbed the crap out of those things. I was so disgusted. Story 45. You're asking the wrong people. Most often, health inspections have a heads up they are coming. As a food service delivery driver, you get to see restaurants in the raw, and I haven't eaten Chinese buffets in years. Story 46. I am both a former chef and a former private health inspector. I've seen some crazy stuff, but there is little worse than supermarket meat departments. I will not buy meat which has been ground in the market because the employees almost never know how to tear down and clean the grinder. I would regularly go in, show them how to take it apart, and make them smell the gasket of old meat that had never been cleaned out from between the parts. Story 47. Not an inspector, but I worked in the dish pit of a pub. Directly above my workstation was a vent with a big plastic grating, or at least I assumed it was plastic. You couldn't really see it for the green moldy crud that coated the whole thing. That was my walking away point. I promised myself if they ever asked me to clean that, I needed the job less than I needed to not do that. Health inspectors, what's the most disgusting restaurant you've ever inspected? Actual inspector here. Enter. Newly permitted and built Vietnamese seafood restaurant. I went in there and spent about 12 hours in there watching and trying my hardest to correct almost every violation known to man. These guys were importing live fish from who knows where. Customs was involved, and cooking it up like it's no one's business. No coolers worked, no cooking was at the right temperature. Everything was stored literally everywhere. Food and live animals on floor, raw over ready to eat, etc. Dish machine? Sanitizing? What's all that? The guy was tasting some soup and quite literally spitting it back into the pot. No one had on hairnets, or gloves, or shoes for that matter. Safe to say they got like a 20 of the 100 the first time I was in there. We did 7 subsequent follow-ups, and their highest grade ended up being like a 40-something. They got their permit revoked, and we had to take them to court because they kept wanting to operate, and subsequently got some people sick. Story 2. There was a Mexican restaurant that got shut down locally about 8 years ago. I checked their health inspection. They scored a 14 of the 100. I'm friends with one of the inspectors, so I asked about it. He didn't do the inspection. But it became a well-known incident in his department. Lots of stuff out of temp, lots of things out of date, dishwasher not working, no hats, hairnets, no gloves, etc. He said they had a chip-warming bin that was a large plastic container stuck inside a standing hot box. The plastic was melted into the box and the base was covered in mold, some kind of liquid, salt, broken chips, mouse droppings, and roach eggs. The inspector asked them to wash their hands and use gloves. They all went and dunked their hands into a shared bucket of standing room temperature water and dried them on their aprons before putting gloves on. Everything on the line temped over 50 degrees, and the chef, manager dipped a chip in the salsa to taste, said it tasted fine, and then double-dipped into the same container to prove that it wasn't dangerous. They got some citations and were given one follow-up inspection a few days later. Their water heater was out on that visit, so they closed the restaurant with dozens more citations. It never reopened. The joke with the health department was that the restrooms were spotless. Story 3. Actual inspector here. I was still a student when we got a complaint about a place, and the woman sent us a picture of her food, which had a cockroach in their piece of sushi. Went to the restaurant, and at first didn't see anything for the first hour, but I ended up finding some dead ones under a dishwasher, and then all of a sudden I saw them everywhere. I looked up to see 3 of them swimming in a clear bin of flour. Saw a ton of them scuttle out from the table fridge when I opened in, walked around their dining area and saw so many scuttling around the floor, with people actively eating there. Sure enough, made them close, and went in the next day with pest control. Pest control guy said it was the worst case he's seen, and actually climbed up on their counters to get away from the sheer number that came out of the woodwork when he sprayed the place. Created a plan with the owner and actually fixed them up really well. And then the place burned down the next month. I still can't forget the smell and just coming eye to eye with a cockroach roaming around in flour. Oh yeah, and the one 24-hour restaurant that had walk-in fridges full of mold and piled high with Home Depot gallon buckets of food. They said they went through one bucket an hour. I was there for nearly 5 hours that day, and they didn't go through one. We ended up having to throw all of it out anyways, since the state of that fridge was unacceptable. And the smell, needless to say, I'm happy to be on a completely different team working with diseases rather than kitchens now. Story 4. Worked in one I could never figure out how they were allowed to operate. Food was never stored, cooked, or thawed properly. Fish and chicken were just left out overnight in the counter to thaw. Hot sauces were poured in 20 liters Cambros and put in the fridge. No stirring or cooling or anything. No lids in the fridge. The shelves were coated in slime, except for the one shelf front of house was allowed to use when our 2 sauce and drink fridges died, and I cleaned off our solitary shelf. Owner thought pouring bleach everywhere cleaned things. The floor was gray-black and slimy. The leaking pipes behind the 50-year-old dishwasher with a broken heating element made the wall soggy when you pushed on it. When we found mold growing on food, the chefs just picked it off and handed it back. Cleaning the whole kitchen was the job of the solitary, untrained dishwasher. Chefs had a nap set up in the dry goods closet on top of the flour. Story 5. We have an Indian place down the street that fails so bad every time they just keep changing the name and owners once a year. Real bad stuff is on the health inspection every time, too. None of the fridges kept a temp. Unlabeled, uncovered, undated, raw chicken kept on top of the fresh fruit. Roaches and mouse poop on stacked plates, dry stock, shelving, cabinets. One time, one of the comments was that they didn't have any cleaning rags or sanitizer on site. Story 6. I once serviced kitchen equipment. 3 places stick in my mind. 1. The Chinese food place thawing chicken on the tile floor. Guy was just hosing it down and the melted stuff was going down a rusty drain. 2. The pizza place with the worst roast infestation I had ever seen. Every electrical device was covered in roach crap. Every sticky trap was no longer sticky because it was old and basically littered with corpses of insects. 3. The Indian place where everything was covered in grease. Story 7. Third-party inspector here. Generally, the really bad restaurants know they're in bad shape, know why it's important, and just don't care. Or are corporate-owned and have no agency at the store level except to tattle on themselves to the health departments, which I see a lot. One of the things that sticks with me the most is when I inspected a chicken restaurant that was reusing the buckets from the concentrated dish soap to store raw chicken. They didn't understand why it was an issue because 1. They were keeping the raw chicken at the proper temp, per them it was actually 48 degrees, and date labeling the buckets. 2. They kept the buckets covered and off the floor of the filthy walk-in. 3. They washed their still gloved hands between unhooking the bucket, quickly rinsing it and handling the chicken. And 4. If the soap is safe for dishes, why isn't it safe for the chicken? The location had a ton of other violations, but they were all pretty standard. I will just never get over why they honestly thought reusing a concentrated chemical bucket was okay. Also, they had tons of large, clean Cambros in good condition they could have used instead. Story 8. I'm not a health inspector, but I rented and renovated a restaurant that had been closed by health authorities. They had built themselves a mezzanine in the storeroom and were living there. When we started dismantling it, my ex lifted his side suddenly and I was showered on rat crap. The extraction tube was fully clogged with solid fat when the technicians released one side to remove it. It was so heavy that it fell crashing through the ceiling and a flood of thick black oil started raining. We also found pigeon remains by the sink as if someone had been catching and cooking them. I've never eaten in a restaurant of that type of national cuisine in my country again. Story 9. I used to work for a company that fixes kitchen equipment as a field service tech some time ago. There were a bunch of disgusting restaurants that I had to service, but the absolute worst was a Golden Corral with absolutely zero safety measures in place. The floor was so greasy that you could slide from one end of the kitchen to the other. Half of their fridges were broken, and cooked food was stored in the open on mobile metal tables. But the worst was seeing a large stainless table next to the dishwasher with a large hole cut out in it, where a trash can would normally be stored underneath. The problem was that somebody had taken the trash can out and left it by the dumpster. So the servers were still dumping food onto the floor and stacking dishes. There was literally a pile of soggy food underneath, leaking all over the floor, and it was right in the main path that people took in and out of the kitchen. So they were tracking food and grease and God knows what all over the restaurant. Story 10. Not a health inspector, but I used to work at a sandwich shop next to a Chinese restaurant. During their annual inspection, a cockroach fell onto the clipboard the inspector was writing on. Story 11. Not inspector, but did restaurant consultation. I got sent to this restaurant and it just smelled funny. I pulled back the fridge, and there was literally piles of moldy food behind the fridge. I lifted up the cold line trays, and I could tell that no one had cleaned it in months. I forgot to mention that when I opened the ice machine, there was a thick layer of mold. It was so thick that my brain stopped working when I looked at it. It activated my fight or flight. Story 12, former health inspector. I'd have to list a top few contenders. A restaurant which had old damp floors, because it was in an old apartment-type building, where roaches crawled out from between the floorboards with each step. They voluntarily closed and had to put in new floors. They were also hoarding in the restaurant, which had hid copious mouse droppings from the owner. A Vietnamese restaurant with roaches that was draining noodles and colanders on the floor. They also did not refrigerate meat during service. A filthy food truck trying to open for lunch with no electricity, planning to sell meat and sides that were left unrefrigerated from the previous night. Honestly, there were lots of singular, disgusting moments that became an issue where someone did not understand time and temperature rules, even if other things were okay. Story 13? Not an inspector, but went to food safety training. The instructor told us about going to inspect a Chi-Chi's. Their sewer had backed up into the kitchen. Instead of closing the restaurant, the manager made the kitchen staff tie garbage bags on their legs and keep working. Oops. The inspector shut it down immediately, of course. They got a huge fine. I don't remember if there were any other repercussions. Story 14. Had to tear out a Chinese restaurant in an Air Force Base food court. When we moved the griddle, there were hundreds of roach traps behind it. There were roaches everywhere. We were taking down walls. There were walls of roaches behind the walls. I'm guessing they would just scatter to the other restaurants next door as they all shared a wall with this place. I think the roaches were structural by the time we started. Story 15. Not a health inspector, but had one tell me the place she was at before mine was the Chinese place down the street and they had bugs crawling out of the cold table lid. She made them take it outside and failed them. As she was leaving, she saw them dragging it back in. They closed permanently not shortly after. I'm assuming they didn't get their license back. I heard the restaurant that took over the building spent a fortune just making the building up to code on top of the remodel for what they wanted. Story 16. Not an inspector, but I worked at a small local pizza joint back in the late 90s. They mixed their own sauce in a huge pot and kept said pot in the fridge for days. Owner would scoop the mold off the top and serve from the remainder. We had dozens of pizza boxes pre-folded and stacked 8 feet high in the back. Would frequently have roaches scurry out of the boxes before a pizza was put inside. There's more I'm forgetting, but those two things stand out. Story 17. Not a health inspector, but my Git brother would buy crap from restaurants that got closed down by the health department to use in the bar we used to run. The crap he'd buy was absurd, caked in grease and mold. Guess who would have to clean it all? Not him. Never him. He didn't do crap. Story 18. I'm not an inspector. I deliver beer. The amount of disgusting walk-in coolers is actually shocking. I have no authority, so of course all I can do is steer clear of these places. But damn, it's jarring how disgusting some places are.